Back in the early 70s, my buddies and I were addicted to rock music. Buying albums, going to gigs, or just talking for hours about it. A lot of them picked up guitars and tried to be the next Hendrix, Clapton or Jimmy Page. Me, I picked up a bass. I wanted to be the next Jeffrey Hammond. When I journeyed to the Guildhall in Plymouth in early 1971, I was looking forward to seeing the legendary Jeffrey, as he had just joined the band. As Tull fans, of course, we'd heard about him. From Song for Jeffrey, from the album This Was, Jeffrey Goes to Leicester Square, from the album Stand Up, and from Michael Collins' Jeffrey and Me from Benefit, and a brief mention of him on the track Inside, also from the album Benefit. A lot of Tull fans at that time were also sporting badges emblazoned with the words, Jeffrey is a skinhead. The music press barely bothered to report the new boy's arrival at all, only that Hammond Hammond had, while playing football in a Copenhagen airport departure lounge, displayed dazzling footwork, and an attempted overhead kick had extinguished several of the lounge's lights. The show turned out to be a brilliant one, as usual, and we got treated to our first hearings of Aqualung, Cross-Eyed Mary and Locomotive Breath. Jeffrey seemed a bit shy and reticent, but Ian had given out this insightful piece of information. Before he was asked to join the band, he was going to buy a barge with a friend and sail around the coast, making and selling owls. I don't know if that was true or not. The Royal Albert Hall, London, April 1972. What can I say? Tull weaved their spell and kept the sold-out audience of 6,500 enthralled from start to finish. It was a brilliant display of musical invention and theatrics. Record mirror. It's nearly time for Jethro Tull's set on a dimly lit stage on Tuesday, and there are these 5 roadies all dressed in neat white Bogart Macs and tartan caps. Doing last minute adjustments? Or could it be Jethro Tull? Confusion builds as more individuals in identical garb slowly filter out from the various stage entrances until there's a round dozen on stage. The situation is resolved at length when 7 of them fade away into the wings, and the genuine Jethros hang their uniforms on a hat stand and launch straight into Thick as a Brick. Jethro Tull don't miss a trick. Even such mundanities as their arrival on stage are handled with style, imagination and wit. They kept up the standard right through almost 2 hours of non-stop music, interrupted only by some brief interludes of some Python-esque Tull humour. As luck would have it, my seats were stage left as you look at it from the audience, so I was right in front of Mr. Hammond. Now don't get me wrong, Ian and the rest of the band were sublime, but my eyes kept drifting back to Jeffrey. His energy, his drive, he never stopped moving. Midway through the first number, the little ditty called Thick as a Brick, he was just dripping sweat. I just loved his performance and thought, I want to do that. So let's go back a bit and see how Jeffrey Hammond became part of one of the biggest bands in the world in the 1970s. Blackpool Grammar School, early 1963. A chance encounter with fellow student Ian Anderson. Ian, you look like a musician. What do you play? Anderson went on to explain his plans to form a band, chiefly with the aim of pulling chicks. He took Jeffrey to watch a local band at a Blackpool youth club. There they were, recounts Anderson. All these fantastic birds. Long hair, makeup, false eyelashes, round his scabby bunch of teenagers called Johnny Breeze and the Atlantics. Jeffrey had never had a girlfriend in his life, so we thought, this is for us. With Anderson on guitar and vocals, Hammond on bass, and a third friend on drums, they formed a trio after the style of Johnny Kidd. Little girls used to watch us in front rooms, recalls Anderson. Jeffrey had bought this crappy £12 bass guitar, which came with an amp in a cardboard box. The band, called the Blades, eventually progressed from playing in the front room to youth clubs and working men's clubs. Jeffrey says, we made a horrible racket. After a while though, the novelty waned and Hammond returned to his first love, painting. eventually landing a place at St Martin's College of Art in the West End of London. Jeffrey, I guess this is where the song comes from, Jeffrey Goes to Leicester Square. I would often frequent a cafe that did a reasonably cheap but good homemade steak and kidney pie. I could only afford it about once a week, but I did enjoy that area around Leicester Square. After failing an interview to get into the Royal Academy of Art, he was asked by Ian, as now Tull were a massive band, if he would house sit and do some decorating for him, while the band were touring the USA. On the 12th of December 1970, the New Musical Express reported that Glenn Cornick, Tull's bassist, had quit due to their old chestnut musical differences, and that an old friend of Ian's, Jeffrey Hammond, had replaced him. Jeffrey, the boys returned from the USA and just said, "You're joining the band." So, let's get this straight because this always amazes me. Tull had their last gig in the USA on the 15th of November 1970. So let's say, for the sake of argument, they get back around the 17th. On the 7th of January 1971, they play a full concert in Denmark with a bassist who, by his own admission, can't read music and hasn't touched an instrument in over 4 years. That's pretty incredible. The story goes that the rest of the band helped him out, especially Martin Barr, to learn his bass parts. Ian Anderson must have had some faith in his new bass player. Not only this, but within a year he was working on and playing on an album as complex, as thick as a brick. Ian Anderson. It's only in recent times that I've appreciated how complex the music is on Thick as a Brick. I was only 24 at the time when we began to put this together, yet there are so many weird time changes and musical innovations on the album. A lot has been said over the years about Jeffrey's musical abilities, but somehow he managed to negotiate Ian's complex music, those tricky key and meter changes, and integrate himself into one of the biggest bands in the world back then. The story goes that Jeffrey would labour for hours to memorise his bass parts, but you know what? He did it, and he did it magnificently. I also believe it was Jeffrey who brought in all the surreal Monty Python stuff into the band, as witnessed in the live performances of Thick as a Brick and in the spoof newspaper given away with the album. So if all this wasn't enough, why not follow Thick as a Brick with an even more complex piece of music, a passion play? By 1973, Jeffrey Hammond was a god in my household. Pictures of him adorned my walls. I must have had every bootleg that he appeared on. Tull weren't reported much in the UK press, so I'd go into London's West End and pick up a copy of Circus magazine from the USA. They seemed to love the band and published some great photos of Tull in concert. And when Jeffrey went for the wide-brimmed hats, I just went out and bought a couple. Yes, I looked like a complete knob, but it was the 1970s. Afghan coats, bell-bottom jeans, and you could get away with it. Just. Empire Pool, Wembley, June 1973. And your little sister's immaculate virginity wings away on the bony shoulders of a young horse named George, who stole surreptitiously into her geography revision. The examining body examined her body. I remember sitting in the audience, so anxious to see what the mighty Tull had in store for us. What happened next took my breath away. As Passion Play began and the band exploded onto the stage, the energy was incredible. On came Ian, whirling his flute like some demented ringmaster. The whole band were on fire, and there he was, Mr. Hammond Hammond, whirling around like a dervish. Like the first side of the album, after that intro, things slow down a bit, and then begin to build and build as the band take you on a thrilling musical roller coaster ride. Right through to the interlude of the hare who lost his spectacles. Like I say, the band were on fire, but Jeffrey was something else. Dancing, whirling, leaping, and still playing his bass superbly. What did I think of the hare who lost his spectacles? Well, at the time I thought it was just a bit of whimsy and a little interlude, like they had done with Brick reading the news and the weather. On the album, I must be one of the few, but I find it a charming little surreal fairy tale. After this, the band came back, and while I thought they could not match the first part of Passion Play, but they did, and it was even better. Jeffrey was never going to be a Stanley Clarke or Jaco Pastorius, but he did exactly what was needed, and he helped drive the music forward. The whole show must have lasted about 2.5 hours. Jeffrey never let up for a second. God knows how many miles he must have covered that night, and for all his spinning around the stage, he never got caught up in his lead, he never missed a cue, or to my ears hit a bum note. Of course, when A Passion Play was released, it immediately became my favourite album. I must have listened to the album hundreds and hundreds of times. I've documented the next part of the Tull story, the 1973 tour of the USA, which the fans loved but the critics hated, and Tull's subsequent retirement in another video. The link will be in the description below this video, and it's called How a Passion Play Changed Jethro Tull Forever. I can still remember the day I saw that headline in the UK music press, Tull quit. I was fuming. What was I to do? My leader, my guru, had gone. I thought of staging a protest, of lying in bed for 7 days like John Lennon, but I got bored after 3 hours. But thankfully, Tull returned, and I saw them in London on the 14th of November 1974 on that War Child tour. My review of that concert is in the description below also. To my delight, Jeffrey was now attired in black and white stripes all over. Hat, jacket, trousers, shoes and matching bass guitar. For his solo spot, he dragged onto the stage a toy dog on wheels called Brian and led the whole auditorium in a spirited rendition of How Much Is That Doggy in the Window? Only Jeffrey Hammond Hammond. France, Paris, 1975. A Tull Tale. Having been reliably informed by Chrysalis Records that Tull were not playing in any UK dates in 1975, they were playing in Europe, but for some reason Blighty had been given the Spanish Archer, the El Bow. So with my trusty sidekick Pete, we planned a harebrained trip to see them in Paris, France, at the Palais des Sportifs. We didn't have tickets or any idea how to get them. And another handicap, we didn't speak the language at all. But we had triumphed before, and this was after all Jethro Tull, the best band on the planet. Somehow, more by luck than good management, we arrived in Paris on the 4th of July 1975, the concert being the very next day. We managed to find accommodation of sorts, a grotty little hotel down some Paris back street. There were 2 beds in the room, and both looked like the previous occupants had been cart horses. And there was a strong smell of sewers, a very strong smell of sewers. But we manned up, and after a few bottles of red, we survived. Early the next evening, we made our way to the venue. I was, of course, sporting my wide-brimmed, black and white striped hat. Pete said I looked like I had an Everton mint on top of my head. We hoped to pick up tickets from a local tout outside the venue. We had learned by long experience that to be successful in getting tickets off touts is just a matter of nerves of steel and an iron will. Get there early and suss out the sellers. Most touts will look to get rid of their tickets early, but as the time of the gig approaches, the price lowers, and if you hold your nerve, you kind of get this Mexican standoff, and the touts are often desperate to get rid of excess tickets, and they will sell them for pretty much face value. But we had no worries. We were offered 2 tickets for about 80 francs, which back then was about £8, which we grabbed hold of. Both tickets were stamped with a red stamp that said Vue Restreinte, but we were assured by the ticket seller this was nothing to worry about. Though inside the arena, we soon learned what the stamp on our tickets meant. It meant restricted view. We had been turned over. We'd be done up like a kipper. So craning our heads around a huge concrete pillar right in front of us, we somehow had to watch the group from there. But from the moment Tull hit the stage, they were rocking. I took one look at Pete and we both mouthed the same words. Fuck it. Up we got and got straight into the aisle. As the band crashed into wind up, we were on our feet, dancing like there was no tomorrow. Actually, I was mirroring what Hammond Hammond was doing on stage. It was incredible, and it was the best sound I'd ever heard at any gig. Critique Oblique was next, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. We drew incredulous looks from the surrounding members of the audience. I guess they must have been all French. They'd never seen anything like these two loonies cavorting up and down the aisle. We linked arms and danced a hornpipe to accompany Bungle in the Jungle. It seemed like the band had just taken it to another level. And there was Jeffrey just driving it all along. As a player, it seemed to me he'd just got better. I never wanted that concert to end, but unfortunately, sadly it did. And after the gig, dripping with sweat, we found a little bar where we drank a few bottles of red and fell asleep in a nearby park, absolutely exhausted. 20th of December 1975. The New Musical Express published an article saying that Jeffrey had left the band to continue his first love painting and had been replaced by John Glasscock. So that was it, the end of an era. Tull moved on, and Jeffrey, I guess now somewhat financially secure, moved on to follow his dream. The story was at the time he burnt that famous striped suit. And he just left all his equipment behind. Didn't even look back, just left it all behind. There was a story that Jeffrey actually auditioned for Tull sometime in the 1980s, but found the task was now beyond him. Jeffrey Hammond now lives in Fylde in Lancashire and still paints. If you go online, you can see some of his brilliant work. Thank you, Jeffrey. You gave us some fantastic nights, you gave us some fantastic music, and a whole heap of memories. And I'll leave the final words to Jeffrey and Ian. There's one seat in the circle, 500 million in the stalls. Simply everyone will be there, but the safety curtain falls when the bomb that's in the dressing room blows the windows from their frames, and the prompter in the corner is, sorry that he came.